Welcome to Module 6, Section 4 of your California Contractor License Exam Prep course. In this section, we'll cover accessibility standards and how they apply to residential remodeling projects in California. While accessibility requirements are more commonly associated with public buildings and commercial construction, they can also play a role in residential projects, particularly when working on publicly funded housing, multifamily dwellings, or any home being modified for seniors or individuals with disabilities. California follows both the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and state-level accessibility requirements found in the California Building Code, particularly Chapter 11A and 11B. For residential projects, Chapter 11A is the most relevant, as it addresses accessibility in privately funded multifamily housing, while Chapter 11B applies to public accommodations and commercial properties. Although private single-family homes are generally exempt from mandatory accessibility, retrofits under these codes. There are still several situations where accessibility standards must be considered. One key scenario is when a homeowner is remodeling with the specific goal of making a home more accessible for someone with mobility limitations. This is commonly referred to as aging in place or universal design. In these cases, the work may not be mandated by law, but it's expected to follow best practices from accessibility guidelines. That means creating wider doorways, barrier-free entryways, lever-style door handles, and roll-in showers, among other features. Even when not required by code, these modifications are becoming increasingly common and are often requested by clients seeking long-term usability of their homes. If you're working on a multifamily residential building, such as a duplex, triplex, or apartment complex, accessibility standards become more than just suggestions. California's Chapter 11. It requires that newly constructed or significantly remodeled units meet specific accessibility features, such as clear floor space in bathrooms and kitchens, accessible routes through the unit, and compliant hardware on doors and cabinets. As a B2 contractor, if you're working on these types of projects, you may need to coordinate with architects, designers, or inspectors to ensure that your work aligns with the layout and fixture requirements defined in the code. Another scenario where accessibility is critical is when you're performing remodeling work that receives state or federal funding. Projects funded by programs such as Section 8 Housing, California Department of Housing, and Community Development Initiatives, or local affordable housing grants must follow strict accessibility rules. These rules often go beyond the California Building Code and require compliance with HUD's Uniform Federal Accessibility Standards, UFAS, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, Accessibility Guidelines, ADAAG. If you take on one of these projects, understanding the applicable standards is essential, and you may need to involve an accessibility consultant to ensure full compliance. One important aspect of residential accessibility is clearances and maneuvering space. For example, when remodeling a bathroom, the layout must allow for sufficient space for a person using a wheelchair to turn around, typically a 60-inch diameter turning circle. Doorways must provide a minimum of 32 inches of clear width, and thresholds must be beveled and no more than 1/2 inch high. Faucets and handles should be operable with one hand and not require tight grasping or twisting of the wrist. These might sound like small details, but they're crucial for real-world usability and can make the difference between a successful remodel and a frustrating experience for the end user. Kitchens are another common area where accessibility can come into play. If your remodeling project involves a kitchen intended to be accessible, you'll need to consider clear floor space at appliances, reachable countertop heights, and accessible cabinet hardware. You may also be required to install sink bases without cabinets to allow for wheelchair roll-under access. Again, these features are not required for all residential remodels, but become mandatory in certain multifamily, government-funded, or accessibility-focused projects. Ramps and entryways are also key features in accessible remodeling. If a client is replacing stairs with a ramp, the ramp must have a slope no steeper than 1 to 12, handrails on both sides if the rise is over 6 inches, and a minimum clear width of 36 inches. Landings at the top and bottom must be level and appropriately sized for maneuverability. These elements are specified in both ADA and California accessibility standards, and must be followed when a project includes these features, particularly in multifamily or public housing contexts. Another area that's often overlooked is the need for accessible hardware and switches. For example, light switches and thermostat controls should be mounted no higher than 48 inches above the floor, and outlets should be no lower than 15 inches from the floor to the center line. Door hardware should be lever style, not round knobs. In some remodels, relocating switches or outlets might be necessary to meet these standards, and doing so could trigger electrical permit requirements. Always confirm with your local building department whether accessibility upgrades require additional inspections. As a B2 contractor, you are not responsible for designing accessible spaces unless you're also the project designer, but you are responsible for executing the work in compliance with the approved plans and applicable standards. If accessibility features are included in the scope of work, whether voluntarily or due to a code requirement, you must follow through with the proper materials, layout, and finishes. It's also a good idea to involve the client in accessibility-related decisions, especially when multiple design options exist that meet the same standard. Clear communication ensures you meet both functional and code requirements. Ultimately, accessibility in residential remodeling is about creating spaces that are safe, functional, and comfortable for everyone, regardless of age or ability. Whether you're installing a grab bar in a bathroom, widening a hallway, or building a zero-step entry, your attention to these details contributes to a higher quality of life for your clients. It also enhances the long-term value and usability of the home. In summary, while many single-family residential remodels in California are not automatically subject to accessibility requirements, there are several circumstances where accessibility standards must be followed, including work on multifamily dwellings, publicly funded projects, or client-driven universal design upgrades. B2 contractors should be familiar with the basic principles of accessible design, including minimum clearances, low VOC products, compliant hardware, and functional layouts. Your role is to ensure that these features are installed correctly, comply with the code, and support the goals of safety, usability, and independence for all.